So welcome to EFT Expert Interviews, where we talk to renowned EFT practitioners on topics that can transform your life. These are live interviews where you can ask questions and get answers from the speaker. I'm your host, Stefan Gonick from EFTalive.com and singletosoulmate.me. And today we are talking to Craig Weiner on the topic of matrix reimprinting, a powerful EFT method for transforming painful memories. Now, Dr. Craig Weiner has been a healing arts practitioner for nearly 40 years. He's the chair of the board of trustees for EFT International. Together with Alina Frank, they run the EFT Tapping Training Institute. They're trainers of EFT and matrix reimprinting and co-produce the EFT Nation podcast. Craig specializes in chronic health issues as a meta health trainer and offers trauma-related courses for EFT practitioners through tappingoutoftrauma.com. So welcome, Craig. I am so excited to have you.
It's great to be here, Stephen. Thank you so much for having this forum and being a source for so much valuable information with amazing presenters for EFT practitioners, the public, the world. I really appreciate and I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Before we get into our interview, I just want to give a little pre-endorsement for matrix reimprinting. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I've been an EFT practitioner for 23 years, since 2002. I've tried many versions of EFT, and I love matrix reimprinting, and I find it more effective, 2 to 3 times more effective for me personally than regular EFT when you're trying to heal, painful memories from childhood or adulthood, any kind of memories, really. So that's one of the reasons why I'm super excited to be doing this interview on this topic with you. Craig is one of the premier trainers for matrix reimprinting. So, yay!
Okay, let's do this thing.
All right. So the first question I have for you, it's always a fun question to start with, is how did you come across matrix reimprinting?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I will have to say a lot of my beginnings in this work actually came as a benefit of being in a relationship with my wife. So, the truth is that I had discovered EFT and much longer story, ended up having my wife present at my office, and I ended up pursuing EFT, and that was a whole journey in itself. And she was actually the one that discovered it before I did. She happened to be at it was a gathering of EFT trainers from around the world that were coming together at that period of time in EFT's development organizationally. And the story goes that she was actually in one of the van pools with one of the other trainers who kind of quietly said at the back of the bus, "Alina, have you heard about this matrix reimprinting?" And she's like, "No." And she said, or she said, "Yeah, I heard." I think she said, maybe I heard a little bit. It's kind of like inner child work. I already do that. It works with memories, and I do that. So like, I'm good. Like, I don't need. She goes, "I know you're saying that only because you haven't experienced it yet." And she's like, "That's true." She goes, "Tell you what, come to my hotel room wherever they were staying that night, and I'll give you a session." And after the session, she was calling the founder of Matrix Reimprinting, said, "Okay, I am all in with this. I want to know more. Like, get me on the route to being a trainer for this. Like, let's do this." And so she was the one that actually discovered it first, shared it with me. I discovered it through that, and then it unfolded from there. Yeah. So that's how it began for me.
Actually, it's funny. I have almost this exact same story on the other way around, though.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the founder of Matrix Reimprinting, Carl Dawson,
Yeah.
at a big EFT for physical diseases event.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Presenters. And that's how I got exposed to it. And my wife already knew EFT, she's a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and she never heard of it. And I said, "I'll give you a sample session," and we did it, and that was it. She was sold. So
yeah, it is one of those things that I believe once experienced, like the idea of it is one thing, but once experienced, it's that profound. And it's the most common response I hear after training when we're training EFT practitioners in matrix reimprinting, because you already have to have an EFT foundation, is, "Oh my God, it feels like every EFT training should have this as part of it." That's how inclusive and important and significant it feels. And that's a really common comment that I hear, is the idea of like, wow, it's like an EFT training isn't complete without this. And I don't believe that, but I think it speaks to the power of it. Yeah.
All right. Well, now that we've kind of built up how amazing and wonderful and incredible it is, why don't you start telling people what does
Yeah.
it look like? Like, how does it work?
Okay. I think I actually want to start. I really want to honor its origins. And I really love this story. I think that so many traditions and pathways have an origin story. And I really, I'll paraphrase it. But so Carl Dawson, who's the head of the organization and developer of MR, as we call it, is he's one of the original master EFT trainers. So he goes way back with Gary Craig, and he was working with a woman who they were working with um, a younger version of herself in a tapping an EFT session, and with her little child. And he was saying, can you tune into her? Do you have a sense of that younger you? And she's like, she is so real and so vivid right now. It's like she's right in front of me. Like she's right there. She's so close, I could just reach out and I could tap on her. And he said, well, okay, go ahead. And that was what began that kind of that foundation that then transformed and opened. And what I love about that is just how organic it was. It wasn't like Carl, there are many people that'll come, whether it's practitioners and psychotherapists and psychologists, et cetera, that says, oh, when they learn matrix reimprinting, this overlaps a lot with internal family systems or parts work or various types of hypnotherapy or, a variety of other timeline related therapies. And it's not like Carl went and studied those first and said, let's take a little bit of that and a little bit of that and mix some of that in. Like he didn't do that. It just really, it's like there was a download that just happened and came through. And that makes me happy every time I think about that. And then he took his passions for the work of like Roland McCready and heart rat math, and the work of Bruce Lipton and Rupert Sheldrake, understanding his concepts of and McTaggart of the field. And so there are different elements that God brought in from his connections and ideas about it. So those concepts were brought in and explaining and understanding. And it's been a number of years now. I had the opportunity to be able to interview many of those influencers, and Roland and Bruce and Rupert, et cetera, and talk, not that they were doing matrix reimprinting, but so much of their work really kind of provided some underpinnings and understandings and influence on it. So anyway, that's how it began. And, some of the beauties about it is that at the heart of it, there's a very important EFT component in it. And so, Carl, because he is the leader of the organization, I'm one of, between Alina and myself right now, there are 3 active trainers in North America. And Alina and I are 2 of those 3. There's also Lori in Massachusetts. So and then around the world. And so when we teach, there is a pre-requirement that somebody has to have had a solid foundation, level 1 and 2 as a background first. And then when we teach matrix reimprinting, it actually, at this point, permission is only given to teach them because he really feels that working in the field and working in person is the way. So our trainings are only in person and not even online. And that's because he's the founder and gets to make those decisions. But when we are working with them, some of the advantages are just the ease of which not only can work with past events, not only can we work with intense emotional events, traumatic events, we could go back into times that are perinatal. We can easily work in utero. We can work
Craig, might,
yeah.
might I step in for a second? We're talking a lot about it, and our listeners still don't know what matrix reimprinting is.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead. I just want to give a sense
I'd
of
like
like,
to come back to that.
yeah, I was just kind of like framing it as that when we're working with, whether we're working with memories, whether we're working with distant memories that go back into like generational trauma, whether we're going into the future. So there are a variety of time frames that we can work with using matrix reimprinting. So I just wanted to set that tone first. When we work with, especially memories and traumatic memories, okay, we're working using concepts of things like memory reconsolidation. So the idea is, how do we work with an individual to help them transform their relationship to an experience, their felt sense, their body sense experience, their ideas about the experience, their emotional connection to that experience, to the decisions or beliefs that were made in an experience. So when we're using matrix reimprinting tapping work, like EFT, we are working with future, past, different times in our life that we may have, as a result of those, developed a way of seeing ourselves or the world in more limited ways. It's so common. One of the things that's beautiful about matrix reimprinting is it really hones in on not just what happened to us, but what were the decisions and how did we come away? What were the learnings that we decided were true, even if they're not, about ourselves or the world? Whether we went through a difficult experience and we learned that I wasn't good enough, or whether not smart enough, or that the world isn't a safe place, or that you can't trust men, women, teachers, whatever. So when we go through in life poignant experiences, we come away with learnings, decisions that are put in place, often unconsciously, to help us survive the rest of our lives, to either not experience that again, or to not experience the suffering or pain of that again, or to not repeat it again. So we have these unconscious decisions that are made and feelings about that. What Matrix does is it works with revisiting those parts of ourselves that have experienced that, to be able to heal those experiences so that I don't have to carry the burden or the limitations of what I've experienced and carrying forward when I no longer need to see it through that lens. Does that make sense?
I think it'll make a lot more sense to people when they have a sense of what one does in a matrix reimprinting session.
Yeah, and we'll
But
get
those
there.
those benefits are great, and I totally
Yeah.
agree with
Okay. So when we're doing matrix reimprinting with somebody, we are, whether somebody brings to us an experience that they're wanting to work on that was unpleasant, adverse in any way, that's like we're setting up how are we going to work on something that happened. One of the beauties that when I'm teaching an EFT practitioner with matrix reimprinting is the emphasis that I have is on being able to work specifically with very specific memories. And I'm not working with all my childhood at once, or my entire relationship with my abusive ex, or whatever that is. So we want to get specific. And so matrix reimprinting very specifically works with either we've already recalled an experience that we want to work with or put our focus on, or there are techniques for helping a person find a good example of when I learned how to feel helpless in a situation, or when I learned how to be self-protective or self-sabotage. Anyway, so there are these things and there are these techniques that we can use to help tune into the body and to be able to find times that are good examples of when something happened. And once we end up locating a time in one's life, we'll just say a memory if we're going past, then there's a variety of steps that we're going to do as we go through a session. One of the most important things is when, from a trauma-informed lens, when we're working through really adverse past memories, gentle is better. Gentle and slower is better and safer. And we always want to work that way, in a trauma-informed way. So we basically want to, at the beginning, be able to begin the process in a resourced state so that the person is in a calm place before we even enter working with a painful memory. And there's a
a lot.
variety.
Excuse me, a lot of people may not know what begin in a resource state.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So being in a calm state, if I'm going to go back and I'm going to visit something really hard that happened to me as a child, I'm revisiting a time when my father was very angry at me and however he interacted with me at that time. If all of a sudden I start feeling really anxious and really scared and my body's getting agitated and I'm getting dysregulated, this is not a good way to begin to work with and transform a painful memory. So the importance of resourcing yourself or a client is being able to help them enter a place that's much calmer and more grounded and in a softer place, so that way I can go in, and when I'm going to visit that younger part of me, I can be in that place that I wish that I had somebody, that I had somebody that was calm and grounded and strong and resourced in that moment. So I want to be able to be that way and enter that state so I can be that way for my younger self. Okay. Now, In the languaging of matrix reimprinting, we call that an echo. It stands for an energy consciousness hologram, but it basically is kind of the simplified version that I like to use is when somebody experiences something really hard or traumatic, it's almost as if a part of them separates off. A part of them blips off so that they don't have to feel as much of what they're going through. I'm not going to use the word dissociation, but there's that sense of this distancing and the separation of self. So a part of me blips off. I kind of have an animated bubble that I picture. And all of a sudden, a part of me pops out to be able to not feel what's about to happen. Okay. And to be safer and to feel less intense. And so we call that part that goes through that an echo. We can call it a part as well. And so when we go back in a session, first we want to make sure that our client is in a calm, regulated way so they can really be there for that younger part that's going through a hard and difficult time. And that's really important. I think that's important in EFT sessions as well. At any rate, once we do you have a question? Yeah.
Well, just a point I wanted to add. I think is one of the things that's kind of cool about matrix reimprinting versus regular EFT. So, as regular EFT, if you're healing a pain, we're talking about sort of like root cause memories, right? Is this a painful memory that caused some kind of life issue we're dealing with, which is usually what brings somebody to get help. So we identify that root cause memory. With regular EFT, it's the method of healing it more or less is pretty simple. You just relive it as if you are the 5-year-old self in the memory, feel all the painful feelings, and just keep tapping until they're gone. But with matrix reimprinting, you're working with, instead of being your 5-year-old self, you're a step removed and you're working with your 5-year-old self.
Yeah, it's a very important element. Yeah. Because if I can go in and I can be there for my 5-year-old self that's going through a hard time, I can stay regulated in the moment that I'm helping him. And when that happens, and there's a process for doing that and connecting with that part, etc. When that happens, number one, it invites a reduction of the traumatic elements. In other words, that younger self that feels isolated and alone is no longer isolated alone because you're there with them. That level of intensity and emotionality that can happen in such a moment, well, what happens is we're going to go ahead and we're going to do some EFT tapping with them to regulate that younger self of mine. So we're able to be that older, wiser, calming influence in a moment when that younger part of me is going through a very intense moment. So that ability to be there for them, it's healing for myself because it ultimately ends up creating a possibility of compassion for that part of myself as well. So I'm gaining the benefit of working with that younger me, that's gaining the benefit of me being there for them. But that separation and that distance that happens between the two is a really, really powerful one that's much gentler on my nervous system than if I were experiencing and being the 5-year-old, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. That's what I always say to my clients is that we're working with your young self, it's your young self that's the client in this session, and you and I are two caring adults here to help her and him.
Yeah. So anyway, when we, part of working with those kinds of difficult, adverse, or traumatic memories is creating safety. And so we use elements of imagination, right? And so it's kind of like a play that's happening, right? And with that is an element of creating safety, of like freezing the scene so nobody else can interrupt, of creating an emotional and kinship and connection with that younger self that's supportive. There are questions that we ask. There's EFT tapping that we do with them to regulate them in the moment. And some people might say with this, but I'm not very imaginative or creative. And really, it's the art of the practitioner to assist with that. I'm not a very visual person, to be really honest. And some people think, oh, I can't do this if I'm not visual. I'm much more kinesthetic. It really ends up not being a problem because we just have the person tune in and relate to their younger self in whatever way makes sense. I don't see so well, but I kind of just know things. Like I know my kid is there in front of me and I know, and I can kind of listen and imagine to what he might be sharing with me. So there are ways to craft, and the art of matrix reimprinting is to make that so that's seamless, and it's rarely a problem.
The word you've been using a few times, we're talking about regulating
Mhm.
yourself, and
Yeah,
I'm not sure everybody would know what you mean by that.
yeah. So, whatever modality we're using, whether it's EFT or matrix reimprinting, there's, I'm not gonna, there's a whole body of work called polyvagal theory, but I think I want to make it really simple right now. Is if I were to ask a person right now, how calm are you? How grounded are you? There's a place that when we know, oh, I'm in a relaxed, calm, grounded place. And if we were to elevate the level of fear or anxiety, you would notice in your own body and your own thoughts an elevation of worry, thoughts, increasing pace, increasing heart rate, your palms starting to sweat, your foot starting to tap, all of these things that are moving you away from a regulated state into a more dysregulated state. And that can show up physically. That could show up as racing thoughts. It could show up as very intense emotions. I could start crying. I could start, all of those things are moving us out of a regulated state into a more dysregulated state. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a natural sequelae of what we're experiencing. But the work that we want to do as the helper, as the aid, or our younger self is going to be much more effective if we can be in a calmer place. And a calmer, more regulated or ventral vagal state, however we want to call it, is a place in which I can be more creative, more compassionate. I can think more clearly and make connections. So all of those things are going to be more available in kind of a whole brain regulated, neuroregulated place. So that's what I mean by that.
Right. Now, if we were to put that into kind of traditional EFT tapping language,
Yeah,
if I may
you
try and
may.
just come up with my own way of saying the same, more or less same thing.
Sure.
So in the beginning of a matrix reimprinting session, instead of working as our young self, we're working with our young self, and
Mm-hmm.
we are tapping on our young self. You have the
Mm-hmm.
example of some people actually physically go do this in the air.
Mm-hmm. They do.
It's like I see my young self here, and I'm going to tap on my young self. Other
Yeah.
people just imagine doing it.
Right.
Um, but our young self is getting the same kind of benefit that we would get if we were reliving a memory tapping, which means we're getting a releasing of the painful feelings,
Mm-hmm.
which then gets us to a calmer place.
Absolutely.
But it's from releasing all these painful feelings, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
goal of any kind of tapping process.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to be doing, for example, when we're doing a different kind of tapping with Matrix. So, for example, we're using the finger point tapping, which used to be in the long version of basic EFT. So, pretty much the whole time, we're creating almost a hypnotic trance by having somebody continually tapping on their fingertips, okay, or squeezing their fingertips round and round and round and round. It kind of creates really a hypnotic kind of trance state, more so, and then we're doing that most of the time, other than when we're doing EFT on our younger self. So we're imagining doing that. And then there's another part at the end that we use the heart coherence, heart math, hands over heart piece at the end. So there are different points that are being used as well. When we're interacting with that younger part, that younger self, that echo, okay, we're helping to regulate them so that they don't have to be as angry, as upset, as scared, right? And then we can be able to start to interact with them in whatever way, in our minds or aloud, different ways that we can interact with them. And the practitioner is guiding this process. Now, challenges can occur, and there are ways to get past those challenges of this
Let's not
isn't
get into
working.
challenges yet.
We're not there. Yeah. So there are challenges that can occur between this isn't connecting. I can't do this. I can't do that. So, a whole day of a matrix training is like, how do we get over the obstacles and the challenges that could come up? But for now, we're just going to assume everything is going perfectly and smoothly. And so one of the most important things that's really at the heart and, at the heart of one of Carl's books and Transform, and, it's about the beliefs. Because when we have these core events and core experiences happen, consciously or unconsciously, important critical decisions are made. Beliefs are created about how am I going to survive this, who I am, what is the world, what does this mean about the world, what does this mean about me? And these very large statements or ideas get wired in a profound way in the intensity of these emotionally intense moments. And so with the younger self client, being in a more regulated place, we can start to ask them questions about what kinds of decisions they made or beliefs that came out of this moment. And this is a real powerful way and accessible moment to be able to get really valuable information about lifelong decisions that a person makes that often go on for the rest of their life, certainly decades easily. You know, and that often because there's decisions that we make when if I'm 4 or 5 years old and I make a decision based on this circumstance that you can't trust people, which is legitimate in the moment. I mean, totally makes sense, but isn't always true all of the time throughout adulthood with every person, right? In other words, these broad-based meme-like decisions that just get carried on over and over and over start to not only limit our lives, but they start to actually create a field in which those situations begin to repeat themselves. And they have a power, kind of like an manifestation of attraction. It's like, okay, this is true. This is not just what I believe. This is the fact. This is the way it is. And so my world starts to create me seeing more and more and more examples and evidence of those limitations. And that doesn't often just go away by itself. It kind of gets wired in, if we use that language.
So how do you use matrix reimprinting to change
Yeah,
to shift
yeah.
that?
So when we're working with that part, a few things. Number one, the benefit that we now have is often an older, wiser self that has much more lived experience, that understands things that that little one didn't, that understands that dad had this disease called alcoholism, or mom, that understands what was also happening in the household that you didn't understand then is that mom had cancer and dad was going through this at that time. So often there's just information that that little one wasn't aware of that this older self understands now, but it still hadn't really been fed to that younger self, that younger echo that's still living out a lens through which that adult is seeing the world. I kind of look at, again, if you kind of have that blip out of that echo as a balloon, and we'll say it's a red balloon for a moment, those echoes live in our life. And if I'm always looking through the universe at my life through this red balloon and everything looks red, even though I've grown up and had more experiences in life, there's still this younger part of me that is like a lens that I'm looking through because it's a part of me. That until there's resolution there and we're able to put down that red balloon, everything I see still gets filtered through it. And there's usually more than one balloon, right? We don't just have one bad experience in life. So when we work with matrix reimprinting, we're not only discovering what those beliefs and decisions are, but then the older self is able to provide them wisdom, knowledge, and information that they didn't know. We're also inquiring and we're doing a lot of resourcing of that younger self, which is a journey through helping to find out what they need. What did they need in that moment? What kinds of things can we give them the feeling of? Just being there as an older, wiser self is often has a protective element, right? They're no longer feeling disconnected. They actually have somebody that cares for them and is there for them in that moment. So many of the feeling sense that's attributed to this is now dissipating. And we can get quite creative with helping to give resources and ideas and tools to that younger self that maybe they didn't have. But as I now imagine in an alternate scenario in which that younger self does have the ability to, and it can be as creative of, they just want somebody else in the room when something happens. They just want to imagine what it feels like to have more cushioning on their back end when they get a spanking. They just want to imagine what it would feel like if dad is yelling at them, to have some sort of control over that and to have a control switch to be able to turn the volume down. So there's a variety of ways that we can have the client work with their younger self to go, if they had some more tools or resources at the time, what would that have been? It might have just had the ability for grandpa to be able to go, to get a hug from grandma and grandma to be with them. So there's, it can be anything from spiritual and creative things to give some sense of control. And what I want to say about this is, what I want to add is people goes, well, that didn't really happen. That's not what happened in real life. And so, sometimes I'll hear, but then you're changing the memory of what happened. And isn't there a problem with that? And there are a few things to that that are important to note. One of them is the reality of when you do neurophysiological reading and science about memory, one is memory is always changing without doing matrix reimprinting. That every time science will show, and there's been Nobel Prize work done with traumatic memory and the way that memory is stored and altered. But every time that I revisit a memory, I'm altering it slightly because I'm now adding the lens of how I am seeing it or thinking about it now at this point in my life. So memories are changing. They're not fixed in stone. Maybe if somebody was in a coma and then came out of a coma, maybe they'd be pretty close. But as long as we're living, they are changing anyway. So I'll finish the point and then hand it back to you. So what I want to say is that we're creating an alternate version, slightly askewed, that's giving that person less a sense of being overwhelmed and helplessness, etc., but now having more of a sense of control over that, which now enables them to have a current relationship with what happened, that gives me a current perspective on it that's very different than how I perceived it the first time. And how I perceived it the first time was not entirely true or entirely whole with all perspectives as well, because it was often through a limited child's view. So I'll pause there for a second. I know you want to make a comment.
Yeah, I'm just you're saying all sorts of wonderful things about what the positive possibilities are of ways that we can help our inner child, basically. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it still might be a little hard to understand for people who don't understand just the practical basic process. So, for instance, when I try and describe matrix reimprinting to somebody, I say, regular EFT healing the memory is basically a one part, it's a single process. You relive it, tap on the painful feelings until you release them. And once you've released the feelings, they come down to zero, you're done. You've, quote, healed the memory. With matrix reimprinting, you can take it becomes more or less what I think of as a two-part process, where the first part you are working with our young self in that special way that we've been talking about to help release the painful feelings with
Mm-hmm.
him or her.
Mm-hmm.
But then we move into the second part, um, where we start doing things you're talking about, but it starts often with the simple question, what do you need right now? Or what would you like right now?
Yeah.
Two,
Well,
we ask the inner child, excuse me, ask our inner child that question.
yeah. In the part first of releasing, we're doing the EFT and we're releasing the tapped intensity, and then we're connecting with them in a way that then is asking them about the decision or belief that they made. And then we start to go to the resourcing of what they need. Right. And that may be something to like take the volume down. It may be something to have somebody else hear. I'd like some support. So as we're working with that younger self, we're asking open-ended questions, and or the adult may be helping them a little bit with some ideas, because sometimes they get stuck, of what might most be useful in this version of this scenario. And really the focus of that is not only just what do they want and need in that moment, but the real artistry comes in when we're looking at what is wanted or needed, not just in the moment, but because of the importance of the lifelong implications of the limiting belief that's created, what is going to be most helpful. So if somebody's, use the ubiquitous "I'm not good enough" belief for a moment, what does this little one need to feel good enough right now? What needs to happen for them to be able to know that they absolutely are this beautiful, whole, amazing, young, outrageously great child? What needs to happen for them to be able to feel that, to know that? What needs to happen? Who do they need to hear it from? What experience do they need to experience? And this is where the artistry of matrix reimprinting and the creativity gets as wide as the universe, and why no matrix reimprinting session is ever the same.
But
Because
and the basic idea here, though, is that you are like the slogan of matrix reimprinting, right? Is like
Mhm,
rewrite the past. That's why you were talking about how you kind of we're talking about how I'm changing the memory. So part of this is that you're reliving the memory as it originally happened, but
mhm,
then you're going to be doing something different. As you said, there's lots of
mhm,
creative ways to do it,
mhm,
and either changes the outcome of the original experience, or sends it a new direction or whatever, but you are changing your history in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's, kind of like sliding doors or other movies where there are multiple realities that could happen in a moment. This is the one that happened that time. Okay, that's one version. And now here's another version. And which one now sits with them in the present is often the second one. They still know what happened. It's not like you're hypnotized out of and you don't remember what happened. But that alternate version now feels totally different in the body to the adult. The perspective and compassion for the self, like, I mean, there are times that an adult is not happy with the younger self that behaved a certain way and wish they had done it differently. I mean, there's all kinds of versions of regrets and things that people carry for what happened. That when they start to relive it and re-experience it in a new and different way, as they are when we're finding out what do they need to be able to create this new altered decision, so that there's not, I get that the feeling that I'm not good enough is an accurate description, but that's not necessarily a fact. It's not necessarily true, but it's the truth they took away at the time. So we're giving them the opportunity to finally rewrite and kind of erase the decision that they made to create a new one about themselves. And that's really where the transformation happens. And so the rest of the session is about reinforcing that and being able to provide, instead of an intensely negative memory, one that's happier or more satisfying, and brings it to a higher level of inspiration. And then there's a part where we do something with the body where we basically bring in the memory. We flash the picture to the different cells of our body. We bring it up into our heart. We breathe it out. So there's a reimprinting process that we do at the end. And so when we do that, it brings in some of the elements of the field work, so to speak, from that more quantum level. So there's quantum elements, and you don't have to believe in quantum physics to be able to do this work, but there are elements that imbue how do I now send to the field this new way of me being, this new picture, this new image of what happened. And there are, of course, limitations in the sense of we can't deny, there's an amazing amount of creativity and latitude in the work that happens in a matrix session, but we can't rewrite a significantly trauma that happened, like somebody that died in real life. I can't recreate in a session that they did not die. I come out of the session and they're still dead. I can't be with that. It's disharmonious. It's disingenuous. It's not real. I can't have lost a leg and then reimagine myself having the leg and come out of a session and I look down and it's still gone. So there are absolutely things that we can't deny happen, but the experience of what was said versus wasn't said, the experience of the way somebody looked versus didn't look. So there's a lot of things that have a lot of flexibility, but there are absolutely some things that are real and logical that we need to maintain. And so there's an artistry for working with that as well.
right.
Yeah.
So one thing I think would be super helpful for people to really get this, because it's a lot of kind of talking in the abstract. If you haven't, if you experience this, everything we're saying, you go, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. But without having ever gone through it, it might be a little hard, I think, for some people to fully get it. So I was wondering if you could do an example walkthrough, kind of like a case study. It doesn't have to be a real client. You can make something up that is
Okay.
realistic.
So, all right. So let's say I'll just create something. A scenario where somebody comes in and actually tell you what, we'll interact. You give me a belief with a typical client or a problem that somebody might give me a problem that a client might come in for you to work on. Let's just interact a little bit.
All right. So here's a common example. Some people, grew up with a parent
Mm-hmm.
who, no matter how well they did something, they were trying their best to do things perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
All the parent ever did was point out what they did wrong and never uh, praise them for what they did.
Okay.
The fact that they
And
did it perfectly, the parent would just sort of nod.
okay. And how is that showing up for your client? Right. So I'm going to speak to this to the non-therapist for a moment. Because as a therapist, somebody's going to come in and say, I want to work on my child. But not necessarily as a therapist, I'm going to say that person is going to come to me as they're having a problem in their current relationship. and they're always feeling disrespected by their partner. Okay. And they get into lots of fights and they have problems in their relationship, and they're wanting to, work on their part of that, of how the arguments are always showing up. And we're starting to work that they feel like their partner disrespects them and says things disrespectful. And it really, really, really bothers them a lot. It like really makes them crazy and they get angry. I mean, that's like how it's affecting them currently. So we'll kind of work back in time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in our work together, so when I'm working with somebody, first session or two, I'm always doing EFT with them first, just because EFT is something that I can teach them to also be using themselves. I don't have people do their own matrix reimprinting sessions. That's a really guided facilitated. There's homework that I give them, but so I want them to be empowered by learning how to do their own EFT tapping. So, and also, I don't go to significantly traumatic or adverse or early childhood events in a first session or two, because I build up lots of safety and rapport in those first few sessions, and then we work our way back in time, holding that context. That first session or two, I've worked with somebody, and we've worked on different experiences of when they've blown up or gotten really triggered, and how they reacted, and the anger and the resentment about that. And we've worked on, and we're gaining improvement, and the person is starting to now be more self-aware. They're starting to be able to do their own tapping, to be able to decrease when they're getting triggered in these situations. And we're making nice progress, and lots of safety and rapport is happening. And then it's time where we start to exploring, why of all the things is this so triggering for you? Okay. Like there are lots of other things that happen that don't get to you as much. Why this? And of course, there's going to be deeper emotional roots to this. And so we're feeling safe enough to explore that. And whether that person sometimes is aware of where something began, but sometimes they're not. They're not sure. Like, okay. We might use certain memory recall techniques in the matrix. So we do ways for them to be able to tune in to this feeling of being disrespected and how it makes them feel. And the body, of course, can remember a lot in its own way. And then we find a place where they were feeling this anger of being disrespected, or maybe it was that brings them back to a memory of feeling not heard. Okay. And that feeling of feeling not heard was, they were in third grade and they were telling their mom how much they wanted to study an instrument, or take this ballet class, I don't know, something. And they remember a memory of them saying, this is the most important thing in my life. And if I don't do this, I just want to die. And mom just basically waved it off and said, no, you're taking an algebra class instead, because you've been bad at your studies. And all of a sudden, this thing that was really meaningful to them, and I'm keeping it lighter in this moment, but it was something that was for this 7-year-old was incredibly meaningful. And they just felt like they weren't heard, and mom didn't understand, and mom didn't care about what they were experiencing. And it was the most important thing in their life. And it was resonant too. Maybe they wouldn't have called it disrespected, but it had the same feeling. As a child, they may not have called it disrespect, but it was somebody not getting them, right?
Not taking their feelings seriously.
And not taking their feelings seriously, which was like everything to this little 7-year-old girl, let's say. And so when we are at a place that like it feels safe to be able to go there and work with us, then I'm gonna explain somebody, we're gonna be doing something a little bit different. We're gonna be doing a little different technique, and I explain enough about it, and I pre-frame it all. And then we end up going into this memory. And we work with the memory in the ways that we've been talking about, and we find that younger girl, and the adult self is able to be there for them. We block out other people that might be in that moment of that scene. We make sure that they connect in a way that this older self can really be with them in a safe way and create a self-supportive environment that's safe for that younger 7-year-old. And then that older self starts to find out how they're feeling about what just happened with mom and what mom just said. And she says, she's really upset. Like, why won't mom listen to me? Right? Why doesn't she hear how important this is for me? And I'm really angry. Right? And so the older self does tapping with them, and to be able to decrease some of that intensity of that anger and upset, so the child can be more present and less dysregulated in the moment. And then stages that we work through is then finding out what was the decision that that little one made, because, it wasn't just maybe about just that mom doesn't hear me. It's that people don't listen to me. Nobody ever listens to me, might be, let's just say, the decision. And what does that mean? Well, if nobody
Maybe my
listens to
my
me,
needs don't matter to other people.
exactly, like my needs don't, we'll just use that. That could easily have been a belief that came out of that my needs don't matter. Okay? My needs don't matter is the decision that's made. The adult self, being facilitated by the practitioner, works with them to be able to provide what that little one needs right now. What do they need to know that their needs do matter? But there were a lot of different circumstances. I don't know. The mom was really concerned about the child failing. The mom had reasons for making that decision that the child didn't understand. Not saying it was right or wrong, but that was what happened. And so the work is then done to then give that little one the opportunity to. What did they need to do? Did they need to say something? Did they need to, in that moment, be able to have some control where they were able to shut mom up and they were able to get it and they were able to hear mom repeat back that they got it, but to be able to have maybe they didn't get an explanation that was good enough for them. And so from mom, they get to experience, I love and adore you, and I totally hear that's what you want. And I get that, and maybe this is something we can do. But for right now, this is what we need to do and why, and this is what we can do given the friendly circumstances or whatever it was. So there's understanding. And the takeaway maybe isn't that they got to take, the ballet class, but they don't no longer experience that my needs don't matter. And then we work with that new realization with that younger self, and we have them create other scenes and the other things in the scene that might make them feel better about this. We may give them abilities for them to see other experiences in their life forward in time in which they really do matter. And they get that. So we really wire in multiple experiences of them mattering. And so by the time that they then reimprint this new scene and we do the physical experience and bring it into the heart and exhale it and do all the work that we do with the reimprinting process, the person will then come out of the scene. Often when we check with it, how are you doing now? How's that younger self? How are you feeling? Because then it becomes more integrated into the adult person. And the results are often profound. The clarity of the difference between not feeling good enough to actually feeling good enough, but now just having understanding for what maybe mom was going through. And yeah, sometimes I don't get what I want. That doesn't mean my needs don't matter. I don't always get what I want in the moment, but that has nothing to do with whether my needs really matter. And when people then have that transformed experience of what happened then, and then they bring it back into their lives now, and when their partner has some habit of not listening or not being present, they start to develop other possibility of tools of being able to say, look, I really need your attention on this right now. Right? It's important to me. It's like, oh, okay. And suddenly other person is like, oh, thank you for letting me know that. I was in my own little trance of my own little, I've got a million things that I'm doing. I apologize for that. But asking, that person often doesn't ask for what they need because they don't feel like they deserve it, that their needs don't be met. So they can't just ask for it. So they don't. So they get triggered when this happens. So all of a sudden it starts to transform current life experience, which then forms in alignment with my needs do matter, which now has the lens of I do matter in life, which draws new experiences that actually prove and reinforce that I do matter, which transforms the total opposite of how I experienced life before, with all the experiences and proof that I don't matter. Because see, here's all these times where people don't care what I have to say. So yeah, it's profound. And, there are some sessions where a single session is just life transforming, changing, and it's brilliant and amazing. There are other times where we're working with significantly traumatic experiences that we need to work with even a same scene more than once, for sure. There are times that I will use and combine with a person, whether I'm using EFT techniques like tell the story and I'm using matrix reimprinting. There are different ways that those different elements can be supportive. I want to say also with matrix reimprinting that it really facilitates not just healing, but forgiveness faster in my experience. Not that that is always the goal, but sometimes is. That it also often bridges the spiritual. quite commonly and without me trying to bring it there. That ability to be able to work with the spiritual side of beings. So, for example, in a matrix session might be, there's a parent that was, we'll just say, always cruel and abusive, right? In the scenario. And, we're hitting a wall of like, they'd never say, I'm sorry. They'd never say, I love you. They'd never say, right? I mean, those kinds of things, because that wasn't their experience. But we start, one of the tools that we can work is we bring in that higher self part of a parent, that spiritual side of one that wasn't often seen, depending on the beliefs of the client in front of me. But maybe they didn't get to experience that part of mom or dad, but that doesn't mean they didn't have that. And so all of a sudden we can have elements of beings that were no longer alive that are brought into the session, of spiritual relationships that I have with beings, whether it be God or Jesus or Buddha or whatever it is, that I can bring in spiritual teachers as a resource, that I can start to look through the lens of the godly part of a person that I didn't see when I was a child. There's often what we call this, the EFT void that sometimes happens where, okay, somebody passed away, somebody left, and I never got to say goodbye. I never got to do those things. And in these scenes, we can often complete what the incompleted. Carl tells a beautiful story of a young man that the story goes is that his dad said, he called him and he said, like, I really need to, can you come home? I need to talk to you tonight. And it was growing up and he was out, I think, at the pub with his friends. He's like, Dad, I'll see you in the morning. I'm going to be home late. And dad asked again. He's like, Dad, I'm out with my friends. I'll see you in the morning. And father took his own life that night. The regret and the grief, guilt, you can imagine that young man would carry on forever. And how do you forgive yourself for that? And certainly a lot of incompleteness in that. And you can tap on and you can work with the grief and the sadness and the regret, all of that. But in the scene, the young man was able to communicate with dad on the other side. Dad was able to forgive him. Dad, there was an interchange that happened that created a completion that was just profound, right? So just in this kind of imaginative, theatrical world, right, in our imagination, incredible things that can happen that don't happen in real life in the same way. And so incredible magical and spiritual things happen. I remember, working with a woman who had been attacked by a dog, a vicious attack. And we did lots of great work, and the person was able to start being around dogs again and all of that. But there was also, there was an emotional side. The dog had to be put down, right? And even though that needed to be for the safety of other people, et cetera, there was still, like, that was hard. That is hard. Who wants to be responsible for the death of a dog? And so in that particular scene that we worked with, she was able to interact with that soul of the dog, with that presence, and gain understanding for why that happened, and be able to be forgiven by the dog and understand it. So there was a whole nother spiritual healing element that happened on top of reducing the intensity of the emotions around it. I remember just another session that's coming where it's a woman that had significant childhood sexual trauma. And, after several sessions and a lot of work, there was tremendous amount of healing that happened. But what was left behind was the why. Why would that have happened to me? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why I had to live through that. And through the final matrix session was, okay, I got it. And it's like what they got, or their learning, was that they had a strong faith, but there was a part that was still missing for them. And they said, what I got out of that now is that I now know that I clearly am so much more than just a body and a physical being. That, yes, bad things happen to my body, but my connection with God, my connection with my soul, that was just something that happened to my body. And I'm so much more than that. It was really profound. And, it's always one's own uncoverings and lessons and learnings and all of that happens. It's never me telling them, that's for sure. So yeah, so I tend to see, and I'm remembering another, just stories that are showing up right now. Is I remember one time I was working with a person who, say, a woman who, in their family, like, father never told her that he loved her, right? And we're working with the scene of that scene, and we bring dad into the scene, into the matrix scene, and like ask, like, why can't you have this amazing daughter? Why can't you just say I love you? And what's not an uncommon scenario is because I never received that, and I didn't know how to, and I felt inept at being able to do that because I never got that from my parents or my father. And as we brought in that father into the scene, how come my father, and we start to see these generational patterns of men not being able, fathers not being able to express emotions, or mom having to sacrifice their lives for the family, or these types of generational patterns. And so in this particular scene, we were like, okay, what needs to happen? What needs to happen? What needs to happen for you to understand this? And so what she did was she created a scene where we brought in generations and generations of fathers that went back eons. We had this auditorium filled with hundreds of fathers, the lineage of the fathers. And to change their relationship, this little girl stood up on a podium and started tapping with all this lineage of men about their fears or discomfort with being able to share their emotion with their child, because they learned they needed to be strong to help them survive, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was this incredible moment of, I'm just watching and visualizing this little girl on a podium leading all these men and tap. I mean, it was really quite profound. But those are the kind, like, that's I mean, we can go on and on and on, because it's as unique as the person and what needs to happen. But those kinds of bigger intergenerational, things happen. And I'd say also, and I can't say why, but I will tend to find people coming out of a matrix session, when the next session is like, how did things go? I much more frequently hear things like, you're not going to believe this, but, and they fill in the sentence. I haven't talked to my sister in 30 years. She called me this week out of nowhere. I have been waiting on a settlement for 20 years, and I got the check this week. I mean, those kinds of things, I just, like, they don't surprise me anymore. They're always wonderful, but there's something about the field of this work that kind of like taps into the magical woo of the universe on an even deeper level for whatever reason. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I like to say. I said at the very beginning, I find matrix reimprinting to be like 2 to 3 times more effective than just regular EFT for this kind of healing process you're describing. So when you think about it, with regular EFT, you tap on the painful feelings of a memory. At the end, you've released the pain, but you still haven't gotten your needs met, right? There's some kind of thing that happens to a person in the original experience where they're in some very profound way not getting their needs met. And with matrix reimprinting, in part 2 of the process, you're doing various creative kind of things to help the
Mhm.
person get what they needed that they didn't get originally, in whatever way that might be. But
Yeah.
it's much greater resolution and completeness and change at the end of it.
Personally, I am always blending these techniques because I think that they have different, and of course, within EFT, there's so many different techniques, and people aren't necessarily ready. I don't jump into matrix reimprinting. And I also want to really empower my clients to be able to use their own self-regulation and EFT tapping techniques, and I want them to be able to start to be comfortable with witnessing and being with their own emotions, which not everybody is. And I mean, so I just think that they do beautifully well together in an integrated fashion by a skillful practitioner, and that's the artistry of practice. And we bring in other tools as well, so yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to disparage EFT. EFT is a wonderful
Mhm.
process itself, and I
Yeah.
I was very happy with it until I learned matrix reimprinting. Okay,
Okay.
now I am even happier. So
Any other questions? I know we're starting to hit our time.
yeah. So I just want to tell everybody we're about to go into the live Q&A part of the process where you can ask any questions you want and Craig will answer them. But I'm also aware that there'll be people who are not going to stick around for the Q&A. So I want to
Mhm.
just have a little transition point where, Craig, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah. So the easiest way is website is efttappingtraining.com because we do lots of training. There's research, there's audios and videos and articles, and the EFT Nation podcast is on there. So that's the best way. If you go to the About Us and you go to Craig Weiner, you can always schedule a conversation with me. I'm always happy to help. And we do have 2 upcoming trainings in September, which are 2-day trainings. One on Whidbey Island, where I live north of Seattle, and one later in September in Philadelphia. Those are the live trainings that are left for this year. But that's where you can get
In
most of
Matrix Reimprinting? Or
the Matrix Reimprinting. Yeah, so those are the 2 we have this year. We usually do at least two to three a year because they have to be in person. And then what else? There's also a free gift there that actually, because
you
the
have another website.
yeah, I'm sorry. We have several. There's tappingoutoftrauma.com, which is for trauma training. So yeah, there's, we do a bunch of different things. And thank you. And also for both of those, you have to have an EFT training. So if you're somebody that's brand new to this work, you would begin with an EFT training, right? Which we teach about 4 to 6 times a year, and those are online as well.
But you don't need to be trained in EFT if you just want to be a client.
No, thank you. That's for those people that want to practice, to be a client or be referred to a client. Yeah, I'm always happy to find, and I make referrals all over the country for those people that want somebody in person or licensed or specializing in an area. So yeah, I'm always a good resource for that.
You have a
Yeah,
free gift for everyone.
and there's a free gift and put together specifically for this, a manual to help you begin the process. Because somebody says, "Well, you're talking all about these beliefs. I don't know what my beliefs are." And so the workbook is going to be an excellent workbook that you can there's a link below there, and you can click on that. It'll take you to our site, and then you can just download that free workbook about helping to begin to work. It's not going to be how to do your own matrix reimprinting, but it's really going to begin that inquiry that's going to take you deeper, that you can then start to work with. So yeah, that was fun to do.
So all of these links are in the description of this video, as you
Mm-hmm.
can see at any point. So that's where you'll see the link for Craig's free gift. I have 2 free gifts in the description as well, you can see there. And there's also, if you want to be notified of all of the upcoming EFT expert interviews,
Mm.
there's at the very bottom of the description, final link at the very bottom is a link to sign up to get notified of each interview as it's coming out.
Great. That's valuable because you got a lot of great people scheduled just through the end of this year alone. So yeah,
Yeah, and halfway through 2026 at this point.
that's great.
So live Q&A, we're there. So if anybody has any questions or comments, actually, just go ahead and type it into the comments area for this live, YouTube live, and we'll see what happens. Now, one thing I'm a little concerned about is I haven't been seeing any comments throughout this whole interview, so I'm a little concerned.
Mm-hmm.
May not be that something's not working.
Might be a tech glitch. Those happen.
There may be a technical glitch.
Can they post afterwards? Maybe. We'll see.
And they what?
Can they post a question afterwards or not necessarily?
Yeah. So if there's something not working here, just post your questions as comments on this video.
Okay.
And in fact, Craig, what I would recommend you do
Yeah.
is as soon as we're done, post a first comment, which I'll pin,
Okay.
saying,
Great.
"Hey, I'm here available for questions," and then post your comment as a response to his comment, because that
Great.
way he'll get notified. Otherwise,
Perfect.
if you
Right.
just put a comment, I'll get notified, but Craig won't.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that way he can answer stuff.
Okay. All
And
right.
if there's been a technical problem, I'm really sorry.
Okay.
The
No,
last interview I did, I had comments throughout the throughout the interview, which
yeah,
I
that's
haven't had
okay.
any.
It happens. People will be here. They can add comments afterwards. I'm happy to contact me and I can answer questions. So always easy to access. Thank you so much, Stefan. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome having you. I love love the topic, and it's great discussing all this with you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for being a part of this.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye, everybody. Keep tapping.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.